Gracious God, to be here safely, for the beauty of this day, for no rainfall, for everybody hopefully getting well and over this. Lord, we thank you for all you've given us. We thank you for these people who are serving us, who are making this good for us. We ask that you be with us through this night, and that those who are not well get much, much better, and that no one else gets sick. We ask these things in your name, Lord. Amen. Amen.
My mother has breast cancer, was diagnosed in '93, and her grandmother had breast cancer too. So I knew that it was in my family. I knew when my mother was diagnosed that my chances had gone up quite a bit. I had always eaten well, had a low-fat diet and exercised and did all the things that were in my control to help minimize the risk of breast cancer. I was having yearly mammograms, even though I started those before I was 40 when my mother was diagnosed. And I had been to my, just for my annual checkup 2 weeks before, and there had not been anything that my doctor had felt. And I was getting ready to go on a mission trip to Panama, which was my 4th year to do a mission trip. And I came home after working, was in the shower, and I found a lump. And this was the day before I was leaving for Panama. And I had fibrocystic breast disease, so I was used to feeling, tiny little lumps. And I always wondered, well, if I've already got these little lumps, how would I tell if there was a real lump there? And all I know is that it felt different to me immediately. I just knew it wasn't like all the other things I had felt before. I really surprised myself with how calm I was over everything, because having been a nurse for so long, I have seen lots of people die from cancer, and I've realized too that I've seen some of the worst cases. I saw the people that weren't doing well in the hospital and people in hospice, in home care. So I didn't see a lot of the people who were diagnosed, treated, and then went on their way and had happy endings. I realized that I saw the worst ones, but I still knew that I think I could cope with being told any kind of a diagnosis except cancer. That was the worst thing that anybody could say to me. I had pictured in my mind that if I was told I had cancer, that I would might as well write my obituary and just crawl into bed and wait for things to happen.
At that point, I just really wanted to support her. I mean, I was concerned, but what I most wanted was I wasn't worried about what it was going to mean so much, as long as I had Val. That was what I wanted the outcome to be, that she was going to end up healthy, regardless of what surgery was needed or what the physical outcome was going to be. That wasn't important to me, and I wanted that more than anything else. I was looking for that assurance, and the focus needed to be on her.
I was sent to a surgeon, and he pretty much said the same thing. Well, here's a mammogram, there's nothing here. Here's the ultrasound, yeah, I can see it. I feel it. I don't think it's suspicious. I think we can watch it. And I told him, well, my mother has breast cancer. He said, well, we need to biopsy it then. And that's the only reason they did.
Well, I think you just steel yourself for whatever it's going to take. And you don't know what it's going to take at that point, but it's a whole lot like I've got to start getting myself mentally prepared to have it be the least interruptive up until to the point of she might not survive this.
My 10-year-old son at the time had, it was right before school started, so we didn't have a babysitter, and he had gone to the hospital with us. My husband had come along. Basically just, he thought we were just coming along just to make sure it was nothing. We were just gonna make sure. And they did the biopsy. They did do a frozen section. It was malignant. The surgeon came in and talked to my husband and my son, and they took me back to my room because this was day surgery. Very small room, one chair in the corner. And my little boy was sitting in my husband's lap. And he must have just been watching me, just intently, waiting for me to wake up. And just the moment my eyes opened up, he jumped up and came over to the bed and held my hand. And my 10-year-old son said, "Mom, I'm sorry, but the doctor says you have cancer. I love you." And that's how I was diagnosed. That's how I heard about it, my little boy. And I'm sure my husband was just horrified. And he held my hand, and I said, "I love you too." And I closed my eyes, and I just knew right then that I would be okay. I wanted to be around for my little boy. Hi there. Like a hot dog? Yeah. Okay. No? Okay. And I don't know what you want on it. We got sauerkraut, onions, relish, and all this other stuff. And we've also got chili dog sauce over there too. Yeah, we're raising money to help in breast cancer research, and I'm going to be one of the climbers in September.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So this is our logo, Climber Star. No, not you. Get those.
Just put them right there.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, you too.
Somewhere in the back of my mind, I think I always knew that I was going to get breast cancer, which was one of the reasons I picked it as my research topic in X-ray school. Both of my grandmothers had it, one of them at a fairly young age, but it was just one of those things you know, I couldn't give you a logical explanation, and I just felt like, and being in the field of X-ray, I knew I want my baseline right now. And I had it done. And 2 months after my mammogram, I found a lump. Of course, the mammogram was clean, but we know that mammograms aren't great in young women. Don't find everything. I kind of played around with it probably for another 6 months. Sometimes I didn't feel it at all, so I thought it had gone away. Came back. And then finally it got to the point where, okay, there it is. I'm feeling it consistently. As a matter of fact, when it was so close to the surface, you could see it. I didn't even have to feel it. It was there. So it was time for a mammogram. And of course, everyone's like, "Don't worry, this doesn't look like anything. But we're going to do the ultrasound just as a precaution." They were going through the motions of doing everything the way they were supposed to do it. And constantly I was being reassured, this is nothing to worry about. It doesn't look bad on the images. The X-ray doesn't look like anything malignant. They put the ultrasound wand on there, and there were 2 tumors. One did not even show on the mammogram, and then there was the one that you could see. And they were like, 2. Well, we're going to biopsy this because, we should get rid of them. And I went to a surgeon, and he said, well, yeah, and they were close enough together. He said, I can get them both out. Instead of doing a needle localization, let's just remove them. Why feel them? Even if they were benign, let's get them out of there. So I did. I tend to do things aggressively. Get them out. And even the surgeon afterwards said, "Don't worry about it. We'll have the pathology report back in 48 hours, and everything looked good." I wasn't. Most people, if they have a biopsy, they're probably waiting by the phone, freaking out. And I wasn't. You know, I'm a healthy person. I did a race the day before my mammogram. You know, I'm 35 years old. I don't feel sick. And 48 hours later, the biopsy was a Tuesday. Thursday afternoon, I was out with friends having lunch. And something made me just, you know, let me check my answering machine, see if the doctor's office called. And I knew it was bad because, although at one level I knew it was bad, the other level still hadn't registered yet. There were 3 messages from the doctor's office to please call. Didn't register yet, that, you know, 3 messages was important. He told me that I had cancer. I thought I'd never sleep again in my life.
He's back in a little room back here.
I once described myself as, years ago, as a social Darwinist. You know, if someone was too stupid to live, you know, die, get off the planet, get out of the way. I don't feel that way anymore. I mean, they're, you know, in a joking way, sure, but I feel much more compelled to help other people, and because I can. I've suddenly discovered that I have something that I can share with people, my experiences, my knowledge, that can help them. Because of my experience in dealing with cancer, I realized that I was lucky, and there are a lot of people who don't have the edge that I had going in, and I have made it my personal mission in life to make it better and easier for anyone who comes after me that walks this same path. You know? I feel obligated and it's not an original thought. And you know, Lance Armstrong mentions in his book the obligation of the survivors to help others. And I feel the same way.
Libby is my godchild first. That's the first relationship I had with Libby. And then she became my stepchild when Charlie and I married, and she was only 8 or 9 years old. And so she is my daughter in every respect. We discuss a lot that you don't have to give birth to somebody for them to be your baby. And she feels that way. We are very, very close, and we weren't always that way. Libby had some severe learning disabilities, and I think that's one reason the Lord put us together, because I had worked, like I said, with learning disabled children at the speech school for years. So, and I could recognize some of the things that were problems for Libby and some of the things that she needed. I used to drive that poor child crazy because she had ruled that house from the back rooms up until I came along, and I upset her apple cart terribly. She had never buttoned a button. She had never tied a sash. She had never cut a piece of meat. The only thing that she did for herself, other than eat, was she could tie her shoes. And that took a real quick reversal. And she used to lie on the floor and pitch Helen Keller sort of screaming fits. I knew she could do more than she was doing, but I never dreamed that Libby could do everything she's done. She has just gone far, has far surpassed anything that I ever thought. I never dreamed that she'd drive a car. I never dreamed that she could live on her own. I never dreamed that she'd be able to be married and run a house. She has just come a long way, baby. We had a long road together, Libby and I did. But I think we both look back and remember it fondly now. And if you can look back, it all depends on how you shovel it, you know, how you look at it. You can look back and you can look for the bad parts of something, or you can look back and look for the good. And Libby and I are about as close as as two women could be at this stage of the game. Libby and Julie were very, very close from the very beginning. They adored each other. And I always thought it was very ironic that they would be the two that would have cancer. You know, I got a little angry with God there at some point. Not but a minute, but I just thought, why Libby? She swam upstream all her life. You know, she only weighed 3 pounds when she was born. She has a slight case of fetal alcoholic syndrome. She had serious learning disabilities. She had struggled all the way through life, and I thought, why this for my little girl? I came home, and there were several messages on the phone from doctors whose names I didn't know. And then Libby called and said, Mom, I hate to tell you, but it is malignant. She thought that I had gotten the news. And I hadn't. I didn't know anything. And it was just a nightmare, just a nightmare. I beat the walls and cried and said, not Libby. The thing is, I didn't even know she'd had a lump. I didn't know she had any problems. She had not told me any of that. And she had had it for 6 months before she did anything about it. And then I had to wait for Charlie to come home and tell him. And that was just the longest 4 or 5 hours of my life, I think. I'll never forget, they were sitting on the sofa, and Charlie and I were in those 2 chairs over there. And the only thing I can remember is the depth of the sorrow and fear in that little girl's eyes. Her eyes were the darkest blue I've ever seen them, and they're not dark blue. Do you know? I mean, it just was. That's a mama looking at a daughter who has cancer. It's just the hardest thing in the world to have to look at that little girl and say it's malignant, you know? That's why I'm climbing this mountain for Libby. She is so excited about me doing it. And that's why I know the Lord's going to get me up it, you know? There were things that we said we would do that we didn't have a chance to do with Julie. We just didn't realize how things can go. I'm not looking for anybody to admire me, but I would like for them to say, okay, you know, you can still, you might be a little old lady, but you can still do things. You can still do this, but more than that, I want to attract attention for the palliative care. That's my primary aim. I'm not trying to prove anything as a breast cancer survivor and I can still do this and I can do that. I felt like I might be able to help draw monetary support. That's what I would like to see accomplished from my angle, to A, draw some money for the Palliative Care Center. They started putting together an interdisciplinary clinic, which Julie didn't have a chance to take advantage of, but Libby did. And you can go in and say there might be a chaplain there, there might be a psychologist there, there might be somebody involved with pain management there, somebody from the nutrition department there. This is everybody with their no hair. Isn't that wonderful? We really did have a good time. We actually had a good time. As we shaved her head, we all put on shaved head things. This is after she had her wig on. I'll show you this.
Did you do that all at the same time?
What?
Got the wig and everything all
She already
transition
had the wig to put on her, and Janice trimmed her wig that day. This was a bathroom party. I heard the climbers say, if I had just had support in this, or if I had just had support in that, and so everybody didn't know about palliative care because there are more people coming through than there are hours in doctors' schedules to be able to do this. But we wanted to be able to make this available to everybody, not just a few.
teaching a course in physical assessment, and one of the things I was teaching was breast assessment. And the way I taught it was because most of these kids really don't do BSE the way they should, I taught it, this is what you should do. You, the student, because this is, you need to know this because this is what you're going to teach to your client. Yes, but this is what you need to do, kind of thing. As I found my lump, then I went through all the things that I had taught them that were the not good things, and I thought, ooh, I know what this is. You better get yourself to the doctor tomorrow. I saw my internist, and I go to Kirkland, and I went in to see her, and my appointment was at 3. And I'll never forget this. She sent me right down, she felt it and sent me down to mammography, and they decided, okay, And so they put me in another room, and I had an ultrasound done, and looked at the ultrasound, and they said, and they got somebody in to do a biopsy right then and there. They did a fine needle biopsy. The physician who read the biopsy brought his equipment into the room. I never left the room. My specimen never left the room. It was all right there. And by 7 o'clock that evening, I left, and I had my diagnosis. I knew that I had breast cancer. And because my specimen never left the room, there was no way that I could say, oh, well, they mixed up the specimen someplace. Because I was right there. I saw it. And there was no question, absolutely no question. My office building is about 3 or 4 blocks away, and so I walked over. And it was in January, but it was not cold. I don't guess it was cold. I don't remember. I was just numb, and I walked back to the school and got in my car and drove home. And I had a case of wine in the basement, and I brought a bottle up. This is probably a gross, grim thing to say, but I found the bottom of that bottle of wine that night. My younger sister, I eventually was able to reach her, and she came up, and she was a godsend. She came up here and stayed with me while I went through all the tests. She was there when they presented me with all, this is what we think you ought to do, Penny. I did not tell my children, I didn't tell either child what it was until I had a plan, because that's the way they operate best. Don't just drop the bomb on them, and then tell them how you're going to, put it all back together again. I told my son probably a week later, and maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks after that, I told my daughter, before I started chemo. And I went over to Atlanta to tell her. I didn't want to tell her on the phone. I single parented for quite some time with my children, and we were in the South, and their father is in Chicago. And so they came to depend on me a great deal for all sorts of things. And it wasn't where I could share that dependence with anybody because there wasn't another parent. And I had to depend on them. And I think it was a growing thing for all of us. We had become friends. I mean, they were old enough when I was diagnosed that we had segued into this friendship, parent relationship. We very much, in many ways, changed roles, and I became the dependent one, and they were in their own way, the care providers for me. Thank you, son. Can I help you with that? And it was such a relief. And I was so pleased that they would do that. And I don't know why I thought they wouldn't. Of course they would. When my hair finally fell out, I knew it was coming. This is just an example of what my kids did. And it was my son because he was the one who was here. I very much had a temper tantrum, and I just went into the living room and pulled out as much hair as I could. And it was all over the carpet. And so I thought, okay, time to vacuum it up. And it stopped up. Because my hair was longer than it is now, and it plugged up the vacuum cleaner. So I called my son and I said, son, you need to get over here now because I have just pulled out all my hair and it plugged up the vacuum cleaner, and stop at Kmart or Walmart on the way and get one of those drain covers and do it now. And he said, yes, ma'am. And he did. Elizabeth would come over here and she cleaned my house. She made sure that I had, food in the refrigerator and food in the pantry. A lot of those kinds of things that I could have done for myself, but it was a matter of this was the way they were going to support me, and these were things that they could do, and it made them feel better. It made me feel better too. They had found that people who went to support groups tended to do better. And I thought, oh yes, a support group is for me because I'm going to do well. And so I got hooked up with one, and I went to one, and I went to it for almost a year. And it was not for me. People that I worked with, friends and colleagues, used to say, Penny, you don't need to go to this, it's making you crazy. It was wallowing in the notion that we all had it, that we had all had breast cancer. And the other thing that was very, very difficult was knowing people who had come to meetings and then who went downhill and who either died or relapsed. That was very difficult for me, even though intellectually I knew that that was going to happen, or it could happen. I didn't want to, at that point, I didn't want to face that. I didn't want to have to deal with it on a regular basis. So I just declined. One of the things about this climb, it has forced me to look at who I am and where I'm going and what I want. Having breast cancer changes you. I am not the same woman I was 3 years ago, and neither are the rest of us. We all agree that we have changed, that having the disease has changed us, and what we want out of life has changed. My hope is to earn sufficient money so that we can make an impact on care for women who have breast cancer in Alabama. When I get to the top, it's we won. We won.